What is something that we as kidney patients can focus on for our health? How do we as kidney patients manage to diversify our diets when for some people, there can be so many things that they can't eat?
And what we want to do is slow down that progression of kidney disease as much as we can.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.
Hi, and welcome to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Dee Moore. As we step into a brand new year, a lot of us are thinking about our health, routines, goals, and the idea of a new year, new you. In today's episode, we're talking about gut health and why it matters for people living with kidney disease. Today, I'm joined by kidney dietitian Tadala to explore why the gut matters, how it influences our kidneys, and what realistic steps we can take to support our health in 2026. Let's begin. Hi, and welcome back to Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. How are you doing today, Tadala?
I am so good, Dee. Really excited to be here.
It's really, really good to have you back on the podcast. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is actually Tadala's second time on the podcast. The first time I was joined by Tadala and another amazing kidney dietitian called Timmy. And this was episode 145 of the podcast. And this was the Healthy Heritage series, African Foods and Kidney Health episode. And not only did we talk about the theory side, but there was also a cooking demonstration. So showing you exactly how to cook the foods. So if you want to check out the podcast, please do. And there's so much for you to learn. And also, learning to cook something new, but having it demonstrated by experts and knowing that the food is kidney friendly. So do check out that episode if you haven't yet already. And if you have watched it, check it out again. And try out the cooking. Earlier, I described you as a kidney dietitian, and people might be thinking, well, isn't it renal dietitian? So could you explain a bit about what's happening in terms of your job title?
What's happening is we're actually moving away from using the term renal dietitian and moving towards using kidney dietitian. I think what we've found is that we have patients who have been diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. And so it makes sense for them to see a kidney dietitian for their kidney disease. A lot of the time, people are not able to identify renal as being to do with the kidney. So it's just for us to have some uniformity across the globe. The UK Kidney Association as well has changed from what it used to be. So it's really good to see that we're using uniformity. So all the research that's going to be coming out is all going to be using kidney dietitian moving forward. So it's a small change, but quite a big change in the sense that people will know specifically what specialists we are.
That really makes sense. And I'm all about making information accessible. And so kidney dietitian it is. Before we begin and before I ask my first question, I really have to start with a disclaimer. And that is to say that what we discuss today is not medical advice. This is for educational purposes only. For your individual medical needs, please do consult your renal team for your individual needs. So I'm going to start with my first question. And my first question is, what is something that we as kidney patients can focus on for our health?
Okay, Dee, that is a massive question. What is it that we can do in order to help our kidney health? I mean, there's so many things that we can do. But seeing as you've asked a kidney dietitian, I'm obviously going to speak about the diet. And
Of course.
What I think is going to have a massive impact on your health, your kidney health, your well-being, your emotions, your immune system even, is if you could have a look at changing your gut.
Okay, so we hear the word gut a lot. People will say, I can feel it in my gut. I know it in my gut. I have a gut feeling. But obviously, we're talking about the physical gut here. So what is the gut?
Okay, so we've got what we call the gastrointestinal tract. So we start right from the mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, you've got your small intestine, you've got your large intestine, and then you've got your anus. So for the purpose of what I want us to focus on, where the real benefits are, I want to focus on the large intestine. Because in the large intestine, you actually hold what we call your gut microbiome. And that is improved when you diversify your diet. So if we're looking at diversifying the diet, we're going to improve our gut health. And that is where we see the most improvement and the benefits.
Rewinding slightly, because you used a technical term, and I always like to break down technical terms just so that everyone understands what we're talking about. So you used the term microbiome. So what is that?
So the microbiome actually is really interesting because they use microbiome to explain an environment in which you're housing, or they are microorganisms. So such as your good bacteria, bad bacteria, fungi, viruses, and you have these environments on your skin, you have them in your lungs, you've got them in your gut. And so when we're talking about improving that microbiome, you want to have more of the good bacteria in that space, in that environment, and notably in the gut specifically. That's where we're going to see most of the benefits that we want to see in order for us to improve our kidney health in general.
You mentioned a couple of things that quite frankly sounded a bit gross. I mean, fungi and stuff like that, but I don't want to talk too much about that area. So what I did want to ask though was, you mentioned about diversifying the diet. So what does that mean? What does that look like?
Okay, so when we talk about diversification, we're talking about bringing in variety. I think there's a saying, variety is the spice of life. It makes things exciting. And you have all of these different microorganisms in your gut, and they need to be fed. So the good ones are the ones that we want to feed as much as possible so that they thrive in that environment. And the ones that are bad, we don't want them to thrive and we want them to exit the body. So what we want to focus on here when we say diversifying the diet is making sure that you're providing a range of nutrients for these good bacteria to live on. Now, what we're finding is that a lot of the research is saying that you need about 30 different plant foods to incorporate in your diet a week. And
30.
30.
Sounds like a lot. I'm not, how on a practical level is it possible to achieve that many different types of, I mean, you said plants, so plants?
I know. But an interesting fact, if I just drop this one here, do you know that there are over 200 different types of green leafy vegetables? There are so many different. So it's possible to have a very varied diet. And when we look at things like even Roman lettuce, or we look at iceberg lettuce, those would be considered two different plants. So it is not that you have to eat all of these things in one day, but if you have the variety over the course of the week. And what is interesting is that if you include things like beans, lentils, pulses, you also have your other plant sources, your fruits, your vegetables, and then you also can include things like herbs. Yes, it might not be a full point classed as, but if you have your 4 herbs, that will class as 1 point. So you have your herbs, you have your spices, you have your fruits, your vegetables, your legumes, and then you also have your nuts and your seeds as well. So it is possible, including even things like tea, because tea leaves. So you can include that as part of your 30.
Tea really surprised me, I must say, because when I think of plants, I don't think of tea, but actually tea leaves, yeah, it is. And I think a lot of people might be really happy to hear that the cup of tea that they have anyway on a day-to-day basis counts towards that diversity. So that's actually really, really exciting actually to hear, and makes it a bit easier,
Can I just say, if someone did have 10 cups of tea in a week, it doesn't mean that those are 10 different plant portions. Definitely, let's put out there. If you had a banana today, an apple tomorrow, and an orange, that's different types of plants. So it's making sure that you're having that variety across the week. So if you
Right.
had green tea, chamomile tea, so it's your different plants that you want to be including in the diet, definitely.
You mentioned about bananas and nuts. And with that in mind, there may be kidney patients who are listening who are like, well, I'm on a very strict diet. I can't, I've got to watch my potassium. I've got to watch out for my phosphate, things like that. So with those restrictions in mind, how do we as kidney patients manage to diversify our diets when for some people, there can be so many things that they can't eat?
I understand, and that can be really tricky. But I want us to focus on what we can include into the diet safely. And when we're looking at changing the diet in any case, it's really important to make sure you're aware of what your blood results are saying. So for some people, you would have to diversify your diet, but making sure you're having low potassium options. If you're looking at your fruit, bananas are not going to be the best for you if your potassium's high, but your apple, your pear, your satsumas, those are going to be okay for you to have. So as long as you have that variety of the lower potassium options. And then also when we're looking at your phosphate as well, where people will be like, well, I can't really have seeded bread and things like that. You can still have the wholemeal bread. You can still have different types of nuts that perhaps don't have so much phosphate. So it would be good to speak to your dietitian and say, I would like to include nuts in my diet. Can you show me which ones are going to be lower in phosphate that I can include in my diet? So it's working together and trying to understand that I'm trying to do the best for my gut and I need the support from my kidney dietitian as much as I can. Because a lot of the time where people struggle is constipation, bloating, fatigue, really poor appetite. And all of this oftentimes links back to the gut. So I think all these restrictions doesn't really mean that you cannot have your fruit and vegetables. We want you to have your fruit and vegetables because the fiber in there is really, really beneficial to everybody, especially when it comes to that microbiome that I spoke about earlier on.
And there's another term that we hear a lot of the time, which is fiber. You need more fiber, this, that, and the other. And again, I don't take for granted that people know what fiber is. So what is fiber?
So fiber is what we also call roughage. And this is a part of a product or a food item that our body can't really digest. And it often passes through the system and it'll come out the same way. So if we eat, say, example, the roughage in an apple, it will pass out the same way. But when you've got your gut microbiome, good healthy bacteria inside your stomach, inside your gut, they are going to be working on that to break it down and then release beneficial products for you and for your health, your immune system, insulin resistance, all sorts of things like that. So fiber is really important. At the moment in the UK, a lot of people are not hitting their fiber requirements. So the guidelines, America and here, roughly between 25 grams to 30 grams of fiber a day. So if you're trying to hit that 5 fruit and vegetables that we've always been going on about, and you're also having some snacks in between, you are definitely going to be able to hit that 30-gram portion. But again, it's variety, which is that diversifying your plant intake, as we mentioned.
I know that some people are sensitive to fiber, and so too much fiber can actually have the opposite effect in terms of benefits. So for someone in that position, what would they do? Is it just a case of less fiber, or is there something that can do a similar job without having to have fiber?
Well, there's different types of fiber. I really like that, Dee. So there's different types of fiber that you can have. We've got something called soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. So a lot of the time, so that fiber that I was talking about earlier on, that roughage that comes out the same, that is what we would call a bulking agent. So we've got this soluble fiber, and this soluble fiber, when you add water to it, it actually expands or turns into like a gel-like nature. So people respond differently to different types of fiber. And sometimes people, like you said, can either have diarrhea, so that excessive amount because maybe that's been too much, or they can have constipation on the other end. But the most important thing is if you're at the moment having 10 points, plant points in a week, jumping all the way to 30 is going to be unrealistic. And you want to do that gradually because you don't want to give your body that massive shock straight away. So you want to gradually increase over time. So if that means going to the shop this week, you do your weekly shop and you have your 10 plant points in there. The next week, you go a little bit higher. But the most important thing is to make sure that you're listening to what your body is saying and what your body's doing, because everybody's body is going to be different and will respond differently. You can identify what things work for you and what things don't. There are so many different fruit and vegetables and seeds and nuts and all sorts of things that we can include into the diet. So not to feel too restricted in that sense.
So really, it's about taking it cautiously, not jumping from 0 to a million, but maybe, I don't know, approach like, is it a case of increasing things on a weekly basis or should it be more a monthly basis? Like, how frequently can we start increasing the variety?
There's no hard and fast rule, but I would say over time, give yourself some time to make that increment. It will be beneficial. And it's not a race. We're not rushing to see who's going to hit the 30 in the first week. It's over time and it's any improvement to your health. So I would say whenever you do your shop, whether it's weekly, monthly, just include your fruit and veg. But the one thing you don't want to do is waste either, because this is going to be fresh produce. You can buy your tinned varieties. They still count for something. And you can also still have your frozen fruit as well. That would also count for something. So it's okay to have things that maybe you can store that can have a longer shelf life as well.
So we've looked at fiber and diversifying the diet that you eat, but what else can we look at that's going to benefit our gut?
Okay, so I'm sure we've heard about probiotics, prebiotics, fermented foods, and things like that. So all of these do have an impact on your gut microbiome, on the good bacteria in particular. So when we talk about the probiotics, we know that these are live cultures that are in the food. So sometimes people who have just had a transplant may need to be mindful about this because they are live cultures. So immediately after your transplant, consult with your dietitian. But generally, when you have these live cultures, we want them to stay alive until they get to that large intestine so that they can grow in that area. But what I think is really important here is if we focus on the prebiotics, and that's where that fiber is really important for us, because the fiber is what your gut bacteria are actually going to feed on. So that is your prebiotic. So that's the food that your good bacteria are going to thrive on. Your probiotics are already live cultures that you're consuming. Now, there is benefit to having these, but a lot of them are not really strictly governed. So we're not so sure about how many are actually going to actually get into your gut. So again, the best thing to do is go natural, have your diverse diet so that you can feed the bacteria that you have in your gut already.
So rewinding slightly, because we hear prebiotics and probiotics a lot. And so I just want to make sure that we define the difference between the two. So what is the difference between prebiotics and probiotics?
So your probiotics are the bacteria that you ingest that are already live. So you can get them in a tablet, you can get them in a yogurt form. They're already live cultures. So you'll find your milks, kefir milk, you'll find live culture milk, you'll find all these examples in the shops. These are live cultures. So they're bacteria inside there. You ingest that. And then what your prebiotics are is food for the bacteria already in your stomach. And so that's your prebiotics. So your prebiotics feed the bacteria you already have. Your probiotics is you adding to what's in your gut at the moment.
You mentioned before when you were talking about probiotics, about yogurts and things like that. But if you have a dairy allergy, how do you get the probiotics?
You can get some in the shops. They are tablets that you can get, but I'm also finding now there are some plant-based milks that actually also have live cultures in them. So the more and more plant-based diets are getting more and more popular, the more we're finding variety of sources are coming up in the shelves. So it's really important to try and have a look in the dairy-free section to see if you can find any of those there. But they are tablets, they are medicine drinks that you can take, shots of things. So there's a variety of different types that you can get. So definitely, you're not going to miss out at all.
So we've been the model patient. We've diversified our diet. We've increased our fiber. We're having pro and prebiotics. We've knocked it out the park. What should we expect from that? What should we be seeing? How do we know if this is working? What are the benefits?
So there's so many benefits that we can expect from diversifying our diet. So that 30 grams of fiber and that 30 plants in a week, we can expect to see better bowel habits. So less constipation. We can also find that we've already mentioned that it'll support your healthy bacteria in your gut microbiome. We also would like to say that there will be a reduction in your lipids as well. So people who are sometimes struggling with cholesterol, so high cholesterol, if you're having lots of these fruit and vegetables, your insoluble fiber specifically, your soluble fiber as well, which we know the beta glucans, I know I'm mentioning big words, but your oats, things like oats and beans, these types of things will have an impact on your cholesterol level. So if you're having all of these, that will have an impact on your lipid profile, which is what we want in general. It'll also have an impact on your blood glucose level. So your body's ability to manage that, because when you have a lot of fiber in the diet, it slows down the ability for the glucose to really give you that high spike and to then have that low crash. So you have that steady release of the sugar as you go through the day. So it helps, as I said, with blood sugar control. And it also just helps with general heart health, as well as being happy and healthy. Because interesting enough, your happy hormone, so your serotonin, is actually also coming from your gut. That's where it's produced. So if your gut is healthy, then we know that there's something called the gut-brain axis. So we've found a lot of data has found that if you're looking at anxiety and depression, looking at your gut microbiome and diversifying the diet as a result will actually have an impact in improving all of that. And so there's a lot of things that are so beneficial for the kidney patient as well as for anybody who's looking to improve their health.
So you mentioned a lot of benefits there. But if we're isolating the kidneys and we're looking strictly at the kidneys, what is the benefit of changing our diet, focusing on our gut health, all those things that you mentioned? What is the benefit for the kidneys directly?
So when we look at the kidney specifically, I think we must remember what was the cause of the chronic kidney disease. For some people, it's diabetes. For some people, high blood pressure. Some people, it's genetics. But in the areas where we sort of know what the cause is, we want to then improve those areas. So where we mentioned about slow release of sugar, that would help with people who have diabetes. And where we've spoken about increasing the fiber and the fruit and vegetable intake, we know from following a Mediterranean diet, because of the fiber in there, there's lots of research around this, that it says that it actually improves blood pressure, hypertension. So if we can improve these things by increasing the fiber and increasing or making better the environment that the kidney is living in, we're going to be having an impact on the kidney. And what we want to do is slow down that progression of kidney disease as much as we can. And so having the fiber will definitely do so. And what we find is the different types of fiber that you also include will also help to reduce metabolic acidosis, which we find some people are on medication like sodium bicarbonate in order to level out their acid levels in the blood. And because the kidney's not working very well, it can't really regulate that very well. But if you are having more of these fruit and vegetables in the diet, so it helps to stabilize or slow down the progression of the condition. So there are lots of things that fiber does for the gut, but it also just makes you feel better in the sense that you feel more vibrant because you've got all of these nutrients in your body, your vitamins, your minerals. And so you feel a lot better. And you can't put a price on that, really.
That makes a lot of sense. There's so much there for us to think about and digest. Hey, excuse the pun. So I just want to summarize in terms of what we've learned about today. So we've learned about the benefit of taking care of our gut and how this can help our overall health and especially our kidney health. We've talked about pro and prebiotics, talked about fiber. We've talked about diversifying our diet. We've covered a lot of very, very useful topics today. And so me being greedy, there we go, there's another pun. I just wanted to ask you.
Love it.
And that is, what would you say is like the top 3 things that people can start with to improve their gut health?
So the 3 things that you can do would definitely be variety, variety, variety. So we talked about the 30 grams of fiber that you can have in a day. And we also talked about having the variety, 30 different plant foods in your diet in a week. The other thing that we are going to mention now is movement. Movement is really important because you could have that fiber help to move it along the gut. So it moves faster from going in to when it's passing out. And then the other thing as well is making sure that you're hydrating, because when you're increasing your fiber, you need the fluid as well to go alongside that to help flush it out. So fluid, fiber, variety. Those are the 3 things I will hand over and say these are important for your gut microbiome and your gut health in general. So change your gut.
Sorry, I just need to ask another add-on question because you mentioned about fluid, and for a lot of kidney patients, we're on a fluid restriction. So how do we manage that in terms of being able to get the benefit of the fiber?
So it's still sticking to your fluid restrictions that you've been given. So it's 500 mils plus your previous day's urine output. So if you're passing urine, 500 mils plus what you've passed the day before, or just the 500 mils would be what you would need to have in order to make sure that that's sufficient. Because one thing we have to remember as well is when you're not passing up that urine, you're still holding on to some of that fluid in your body, which means you're not then going to be dehydrated, which is what will cause an issue. So the important thing is make sure that you are having that 500 mils where you can. Some people tend to say, oh, it's cold, I don't want to drink a lot more. So if I'm not going to drink my 500 mils, I'm just not going to. It's still important for you to keep that, especially if you're increasing your fiber intake at the moment, but still stick within your fluid restriction levels.
And my final question is, what is your final word of encouragement for the listeners and people watching?
I know 30 grams and 30 plants sounds like a lot, and we have sort of tried to break it down a little bit more. But I want people to remember that it's a step-by-step. Improve day by day. It's not a race. We're trying to make sure that we do the best that we can for where we are right now. So give yourself time as well. You will see the benefits. You will reap what you have sown. It will come in time. Just be patient with yourself. But it is doable. And you have the support from your local dietitian. So please speak to your kidney dietitian. And together, you guys can achieve an amazing gut microbiome. So I'm sure it'll be amazing.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for all the information that you've shared. I've learned so much today that will help me personally, and I know that this will help so many people out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Dee. Thanks. It's always a pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast. I hope this conversation has given you encouragement and practical ideas for the new year. and a new appreciation for how gut health connects to kidney health. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps other kidney warriors discover the podcast. You can also stay connected by signing up to the email mailing list and joining the WhatsApp channel. The links are in the description box. I'm excited to share that the next episode will be a powerful kidney warrior story, a personal journey that speaks to resilience, hope, and choosing to live beyond a diagnosis. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, take care and choose to live.
Diary of a Kidney Warrior podcast in partnership with Kidney Care UK, sharing faith, knowledge, hope, and love.